Friar Asaya, a Capuchin student at the time, asked him where this holy soul lived and who she was. But Father Annibale answered, "Just think about preparing yourself properly for the priesthood and always doing God's will. And in due course, you will discover who this soul is." Father Asaya, become a priest, went to see Luisa Piccarreta, from whom he sought advice and, not infrequently, comfort in his apostolate, threatened by malicious gossip. At that time, the monistic province of Puglia was passing through a difficult period because of various disagreements between the two provinces of Bari and Lecce, united in a single monistic province. Certain fathers headed a reform that was blocked by St. Pious X. The majority submitted, but others resisted, and ended by being expelled from the order and excommunicated. One of these was Father Gerardo, superior and director of the Studentate of Francavilla. This father had extraordinary ideas about running the students' community with a draconian discipline. He frequently left the students fasting because they had to mortify themselves and resemble the crucified Christ. The worst thing was that he did not even allow them to study. Their studying was to consist of the crucifix and penance. He consequently placed in the students' rooms a large crucifix and a scourge. It is easy to grasp the state of mind of all the students, many of whom fell ill. Father Annibale Di Francia, on one of his visits, called Father Gerardo and made him understand that young men who were still growing could not be treated with such regime. And he himself set the example by taking a great many provisions to the friary and begging them to eat their fill, at least sometimes. Father Annibale was very sensitive to the young students' health, and would often say to them, "This is not God's will." It seems that Father Gerardo was not totally unmoved by the exhortations of Father Annibale, who could speak with such conviction and love that he had an impact on even the hardest of hearts. In fact, the results were immediately noticed. Books were brought for the priestly formation of the young men, and slightly larger portions of bread and soup began to appear. Shortly afterwards, Father Gerardo left the order and was excommunicated for his bizarre ideas and his rebellion against the Church. The Venerable Annibale's words came true. Indeed, when the despairing students knelt at his feet for confession, he would often say, "Continue to live God's will intensely, because in a little while everything will change." Courage. Many fathers were in contact with Father Annibale, and through him became acquainted with Luisa. How is it possible to forget Father Daniel from Triggiano, a splendid figure of a Capuchin, a man who was a true little flower of St. Francis? Still today, his simplicity, his words, and his acts live on throughout our monistic province. Father Daniel spoke of Luisa Piccarreta as though she were a heavenly creature, and when, as a young seminarian, I went to his room for confession, he always said this to me: "Are you Bucci from Corato? Did you know Luisa? You should know that she is a great saint, and you should never stop praying to her if you want to be a priest." Father Daniel was the historian of Triggiano, and also published several devotional manuals, drawing heavily from Luisa Piccarreta's books. The way he spoke of Luisa suggests that he was in direct contact with the servant of God, and with Venerable Annibale. I also heard the following fathers talk a lot about the servant of God, Luisa Piccarreta. Father Giovanni di Bellis, who was frequently invited to Corato to preach, went to Luisa's house on these occasions. Father Giovanni, my confrere in the community of the Friary of Trentapoli when I was superior and parish priest, often spoke to me of Luisa Piccarreta and Saint Annibale Maria Di Francia, whom he had known personally. I had the good fortune to be present at Father Giovanni's last moments. This father died while he was completely immersed in prayer, his hands joined, the beads of the rosary between them. His last words were, "May God's will be done." It was 1982. Father Terenzio from Campi Salentina also deeply venerated the servant of God, Luisa Piccarreta, and would talk of her every time he met me. It was he who told me that the beatification cause of Father Annibale, Luisa's confessor, had been initiated. When I was a young novice at the Friary of Alessandro, Father Terenzio was superior. One day he offered me this testimony. There was a period when I was going through a crisis in my faith, and one day I went to Luisa, who listened to me kindly. She clarified all my doubts and gave me such clear and profound theological explanations that they were a revelation to me. All the doubts that my theological studies had not clarified were dispelled by Luisa. There is no doubt that Luisa had the gift of infused knowledge. Father Guglielmo from Barletta, one of the most distinguished priests of the province, who had several times been minister provincial, and was rector of our theology center for students, spoke one day, during a lesson on aesthetics, of Venerable Father Annibale and his works. He spoke at length of l'Orologio della Passione and of the book Maria nel Regno Divina Volontà. Referring to Luisa Piccarreta, he said, "She is a great and marvelous soul. We are not even worthy to be her fingernail." Father Guglielmo did not tell me whether he had known Luisa personally. Almost all our older fathers had direct or indirect contact with the Venerable Annibale and Luisa Piccarreta. Among them, those to be remembered are Father Zachariah from Trigiano, several times provincial, Father Fedele Montescaglioso, Father Giuseppe from Francavilla Fontana, Father Tobia from Trigiano, Father Antonio from Stigliano, who left some writings on the servant of God, Father Accanglio from Barletta, also provincial, Father Pio from Trigiano, provincial, Father Gabriel from Corato, Father Timoteo from Aquarica, a great friend of Luisa's last confessor, Father Benedetto Calvi, in whose parish he often preached. He also assisted at the translation of Luisa's body from the cemetery to the church, and celebrated at the Mass in the main church for the opening of the beatification cause of the servant of God, Luisa Piccarreta. Father Salvatore from Corato, of whom I shall speak in a separate chapter. Many lay brothers who went to Corato to beg for alms never failed to visit Luisa. Friar Ignazio, Friar Abella, Friar Rosaria, Friar Vito, and Friar Crispino, who often spoke to me enthusiastically of Luisa, whom they greatly revered. Luisa's special love for the Capuchins, Father Salvatore from Corato, and Luisa Piccarreta. Father Salvatore from Corato was a Capuchin totally focused on Luisa the saint. I knew him when I was a student at the seminary of Giovinazzo, the 4th and 5th years of secondary school. Father Salvatore came to spend his holidays with us. During our walks down the alleys in the friary garden, he always spoke about Luisa to me and about how his Capuchin vocation developed. Father Salvatore was a splendid figure of a Capuchin. He came from a well-to-do family. He had very gentle manners and showed a delicacy of mind that I have rarely encountered in other friars. His Capuchin and priestly vocation caused him great suffering and gave rise to much opposition. As an orphan, he had been brought up by an aunt who often took him to visit Luisa, the saint, who regarded him with great kindness and gladly engaged in conversation with the young lad. One day she said to him, "The Lord wants you to be a priest." But the boy did not attach much importance to her words. After becoming a good-looking young man, rich and sought after by all the girls, he embarked upon a career in the Navy and made many voyages. During the long ocean crossings, which sometimes lasted for months on end, the brilliant sailor would stay on the bridge of the ship to contemplate the infinite sea and the stars. He often remembered Luisa's words, "The Lord wants you to be a priest." Finding himself in danger of death, all that was left to him was to call upon Luisa. "Luisa, if you want me to be a priest, save me." Chance had it that many of his companions died, whereas he was saved by a strange miracle. Shortly afterwards, he abandoned his career, returned to Corato, and went to see Luisa. After a long conversation, Luisa advised him to enter the Capuchins, telling him that he would encounter enormous difficulties. The Lord would be putting his vocation to the test. Indeed, he had difficulty in being accepted by the order, meeting with opposition from those in charge of the students' formation. They cited his age, for he was already older than the normal students, his life as a sailor, certainly ridden with vice, and it was also said that coming from a well-off family, he would find it very difficult to embrace a rule so strict in itself. The letters of introduction from the archpriest Father Clemente Ferrara and from Father Andrea Bevilacqua, who personally accompanied him to the novitiate in Montescagliasso, were to no avail. The novice master and superior did not accept him, nor did they allow him to enter the friary. Thus the poor young man had to stay outside the friary for 3 days, awaiting an answer from the Father Provincial, to whom the superior and novice master had perhaps turned. Luisa's words came true. Father Salvatore, received into the Capuchin order, generously relinquished all his family possessions and embarked upon studies for the priesthood. Ordained a priest, he wanted to go to Luisa's house to celebrate a Thanksgiving Mass. He would end his stories with these words, "Luisa is in my heart and in my life. I feel her very close, as though she still wanted to speak to me." And he added, "I am sure that I will not have a long life, because Luisa is in a hurry to bring me to heaven." And he would say this with a smile so heavenly that it is impossible to describe. Father Salvatore was used by his superiors as teacher and director of our boys in the minor seminaries, and was highly appreciated and loved by all. His spiritual and human gifts enriched the exercise of his priestly ministry. His health, which had been shaky since his entry into the order, was a sign of God's will, which matured him for his kingdom through suffering. When I asked him if I could read Luisa's writings, which had been condemned by the Holy Office, he answered no, saying, Luisa belongs entirely to the Church and in the Church, which often tells us to renounce even beautiful things. Remember that all the Church does is God's will, which has its own times. Perhaps the world is not yet ready to receive and understand this great saint. I believe that in a little while the Lord Himself will put her on the lampstand. Father Salvatore died on September 3rd, 1956, at the age of 40.
End of chapter 4.